Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, good.
Okay, awesome. Good evening. So I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. I sincerely appreciate that you folks have taken time out of your evening to hear about wetlands. And I'm thrilled to be talking to you a little bit about the town and play, some wetlands beyond that, and some other issues. So, slide. As mentioned, my name is Katie Mulligan, and I'm the current Syracuse organizer for Jobs to Move America, who are doing some work here in Central New York related to advocacy around Micron. I've been with Jobs for about a month, but I am also a freelance illustrator. I'm an adjunct instructor at Syracuse University, and I'm also a current graduate student in illustration. Have to give a disclaimer. I would like to emphasize that the views that I express tonight are not Syracuse University's. They're not Jobs to Move America. They are my personal opinions based on some research that I've conducted. So now that that's out of the way, I have been involved, as I mentioned, with Jobs to Move America for about a month. But I think, like all of you, I've been watching the Micron developments here in Central New York very closely. When the environmental impact statement was issued, I was highly curious about the area of wetlands. Slide. My focus in research at Syracuse University is wetlands. More particularly, I'm a swamp enthusiast who has lived about 20 minutes from the future site of Micron for my entire life, practically. My current thesis project involves taking a closer look at wetlands, which I consider to be some of our most underappreciated ecosystems. This interest comes in part from my proximity to Cicero Swamp, a nearby wildlife management area I grew up about 10 minutes from. I have a deep fondness for the wetlands we are fortunate to have here in Central New York because they have formed an essential part of my childhood. I, like I'm sure many of you have spent so much time exploring creeks for frogs, stomping around in the mud that we have here, and enjoying our environment that we are so fortunate to have. Because of this, the rapid disappearance and declining proximity of wetlands stretching back decades, which I have uncovered within my work, has been fairly alarming. I've been driven to question, slide please, what has happened to the wetlands we have known, and why are they disappearing? There are certainly many reasons for this, and the history of wetlands throughout the United States is a complex one. One contributing factor is certainly that throughout the history of the United States, wetlands have been framed with rhetoric and representation that devalues them in favor of more noble pursuits like drainage for development. And just to show you folks, you can see that's where I grew up, very near to the town of Clay, but also near Oneida Lake and Cicero Swamp. So these are issues very close to my heart. Slide, please. I'll have you slide again.
Okay.
One of my favorite authors, Anne Valisis, writes in her text, Discovering the Unknown Landscape, quote, wetlands figured prominently in the American dream, not as they were, but as what they might become. Within the United States, wetlands have often been framed with rhetoric and representation that devalues them in favor of more noble pursuits, like drainage for development. Cicero Swamp, located near the Micron site in Cicero, is also known as Rattlesnake Gulch, has long been known largely for its mosquitoes and the potential rattlesnake sighting. Indeed, to myself as a local, this was my perception for much of my life, which was somewhat entrenched in fear. Like many other wetland complexes, Cicero Swamp has been long home to an attempted draining that has stretched over hundreds of years, with many documented instances of attempts to tame the swamp. Despite the reputation that the swamp holds, the truth simultaneously exists that the area is a complex, essential network of ecosystems that hold up life in this region as we know it. Many wetlands within the United States and beyond have historically been drained and destroyed in favor of development. Slide. We have lost over 50% of our historical wetlands within the United States, which is a conservative number. It's closer to probably 60%, if I'm being honest. And within New York State, we have lost around 50% of our historical wetlands to the state. Again, conservative number. These studies aren't exactly exact. It's probably closer to 53%, but just to make sure we're being accurate. The purposes of draining and loss have varied, but there is a commonality in all the stories of local and national wetlands that I have observed. Their existence often falls second in demand to the economic pursuits of industry and development nearby. Slide. This repeated story of drainage now includes the 398.75 acres of wetlands that Micron will occupy in order to house 4 FOBs in Clay, New York. These affected wetlands include all kinds of ecosystems: emergent marsh, red maple swamps, shrub swamps, and more. In our conversation tonight, I will argue that the perception of wetlands may have shifted throughout history, but at very few points has that perception been truly protective, including in the case of Micron. Swamps and wetlands have often fallen to the wayside in favor of development. We will walk through some examples within my own thesis research of Cicero Swamp that I have documented, but also will visit the case of Micron's wetlands along the way. Let us begin by going back to the early industrialization and development of the 20th century within Cicero Swamp, wherein it had quickly been established that wetlands should be put aside in pursuance of a noble cause. Here is a sample of that proposed noble development for industry and agriculture. In 1918, it was determined that a canal should be built to connect industry to the previously mentioned Oneida Lake through Cicero Swamp. It was also alleged that the swamp held hidden, valuable farmland under its murky bog depths, surely best used for agricultural development. The industrialization within the United States was inherently tethered to the idea of wetland drainage. Indeed, Cicero Swamp is a magnified case of this desire, but it is by far not the only location. We can see history repeating today. The swamps that had laid undisturbed by large interruption for thousands of years were logged, drained, and erased in pursuit of railroad, agriculture, and other industry during the 20th century. These clippings are samples, but I assure you, I have found newspapers and records and continued work with the Onondaga Historical Association that document attempted draining throughout the entirety of the known history of Cicero Swamp. The rhetoric of, quote, wasteland, great waste place, and so on, as seen here, are so commonly used in writings of Cicero Swamp and other swamps like it. It should be no wonder why negative connotation persists throughout much of the 20th century, but also beyond to the current day. Slide, please. Unfortunately, the myth of lesser priority to development in wetlands persists to this day. The Ramsar Convention's wetland assessment during 2025 signaled 3 major culprits of destruction of wetlands within the United States at an alarming rate: invasive species, industrial expansion, and urban expansion. The fervor of development and drainage visits wetlands of the United States with continued fervor, and under the continued political apparatus of this country, is free to do so. Slide. Indeed, even the home country of Iran, where the original Ramsar Convention's treaty in 1971, which protected wetlands near and far, was created, has wetlands and water-based ecosystems so developed and depleted that large cities are facing a looming water crisis. The problem is not one that stops at the borders of clay, it persists well beyond. All organisms within wetlands exist in a delicate network of plants and other organisms working in tandem to support each other. This is true of wetland ecosystems, especially, which hold a massive saturation of life. In the case of Cicero Swamp, there have been several endangered species nearly eliminated during attempted drainage. The eastern Massasauga, which I've illustrated here, is a small rattlesnake that dwells in the bogs of the swamp. A once very common species has now been eliminated to around 100, which again is I would say an estimate. I don't know if that's an exact number. Slide, please. This is due to several factors, but there are several instances of documented attempts to eradicate the species within this area. This included targeted hunting when the species emerged in localities during the hot summers. This also occurred because of the ravaging of delicate bog ecosystems during repeated attempted draining. So you folks can see here, this is an illustration from a series I made, and that is an actual newspaper clipping from 1965. When sheriffs set a field on fire in Cicero to sort of lure out snakes, and then stood with guns and waited to shoot them. I'll have it noted that there's never been a lethal eastern Massasauga bite documented within Cicero. Obviously, they're venomous. I wouldn't want one in my home. I can't blame people for that. But they're really 2-foot-long snakes that are very shy. And the sort of myth and perception of these snakes has actually, again, led to their near extinction. And that's well documented within many newspaper clippings like this. More than a third of endangered and threatened species within the United States live in wetlands, and nearly half use wetlands at some point in their life cycle. When we overlook the necessity of wetlands to so many species, we risk losing a massive saturation of life. This includes those Indiana bats that we all have likely heard of in the news as sort of an image when thinking about Micron, which have decreased at an alarming rate of over 90% here in New York State. The depletion of life at the Micron site includes a heron rookery that Catherine and I witnessed ourselves that was once located on the site and trees that are now gone. This also includes the migratory birds that will seek to return to the Micron site this year to those floodplain forests that they have known for their lifespans that have now disappeared. While we can mitigate these wetlands to some degree, it is undeniably true that the ripples of this drainage and development will long be felt within this area. This also includes the delicate networks of plant life that go unspoken for that occupy wetlands throughout central New York. For example, with the elimination and repeated draining of bog habitat in Cicero Swamp during the late 1800s to early 1900s, the ram's head lady slipper, illustrated here, disappeared at a rapid rate within Cicero Swamp, and it has now not been seen since about 1905.
Oh, wow.
There are 20 historical species of orchid which have disappeared at an alarming rate in Cicero Swamp. Many have not been seen for a very long time. Many plant species rely on the specific circumstances of red maple swamps or emergent marshes. Even though these ecosystems may be seen as common wetlands, or not as special as those rarer ecosystems, they hold a massive saturation of life that will surely be interrupted by their destruction. When these environments disappear, it is inevitable that despite our best efforts, the life there also disappears. Next slide. So I would like to close with a series of illustrations that I have created as I followed the development at the site in Clay. Wetlands like those that we have lost are precious ecosystems that are delicate, complex, and necessary to all ways of life on this planet. This is an illustration that I created at the site just off Burnett Road last year, when development had not yet begun and the first signs had just gone up, signaling Micron's entrance. When I visited this ecosystem, it was home to so many birds, plant life, and also the memories of those whose homes once occupied this space. Slide, please. This is that exact site as it stands now, about a month ago. The ecosystem has been completely eradicated, and news articles depict that Micron is 4 months ahead of schedule. We all deserve, I believe, to have a say in what happens to these ecosystems and to speak out for their protection. When I attended a town hall in Clay last year, I was deeply impacted by the stories that residents shared about the land and the connection to the land that they all had, from decades and generations of families that had lived there. The wetlands here in central New York have foundations that stretch back thousands of years to our last thaw during the Ice Age that froze New York State and thawed and created Lake Iroquois, which is now Lake Oneida, that we all love. Although economic development is certainly necessary to those who need it most in central New York, especially Syracuse, we must also remember the cost of the land that we occupy in order to do so. Next slide. Thank you, that's it.